Heath Ledger was sitting in my seat on an airplane when I was about 13 on a family holiday. I knew him only from 10 Things I Hate About You, and it was my favorite film ever. He was in the right seat but on the wrong plane, and he jumped up and ran across the tarmac. Simpler time, small airport. My grandpa passed away in November of 2008. I was at my dad's house. The front yard is almost enclosed by pine trees. I kept hearing weird noises, so I decided to go outside and see what it was. We shined a light on the trees and were greeted by many pairs of eyes. There had to be at least 20 owls just hanging out in the trees. My grandpa had an interesting way with birds, and we had a very close bond. That was the only time the owls had ever been to our house. Then my mastiff passed away last year. I was home alone, brushing my teeth, when I heard the familiar sound. There they were, owls in the trees. It was a completely different time of year. 12 years later, the owls keep watch through the inside of a pen at least 9 feet clear across a room and skewered a fly that was annoying me. I felt like a ninja and had no way to prove it to anyone. I was in a bookstore once, and my friend, being a huge Doctor Who fan, was looking at some Doctor Who books in the sci-fi section while I looked at Star Wars books. I came around the bookcase to see what he was looking at, and I started saying how boring Doctor Who is. I then started roasting particular actors who had played the Doctor, especially Colin Baker. I was ripping into this guy and how shit of an actor he is and overacted everything and was just the worst Doctor ever. My friend and I both looked up, and standing where I had been standing 5 minutes before with this huge grin on his face was Colin Baker.
I was at a coffee shop many years ago in Amherst, Massachusetts, when a guy walked in, head down, and just sat on the stage. He pulled out a steel guitar and started playing. Myso ignored it for a bit before he realized the guy was playing Zeppelin tunes. He walked up to ask the guy where he learned to play those tunes on a steel guitar. When the guy looked up, it was John Paul Jones.
My grandmother once spent a week in New York watching musicals with friends. She told me that she was walking across the park by herself and ripped her purse. 2 very nice men helped her get her things together and then insisted on getting a pic of the 3 of them for her grandkids. It was Sean Astin and Elijah Wood. She had no idea. I grew up in a haunted farmhouse. Sometimes at night you would hear a car drive up the gravel driveway and wait outside the house, but when you looked outside, there was no car to be seen. Sometimes you would hear the sound of a car speed off the driveway, but equally no car to be seen.
Up to the NBC studios in Burbank to try out for a TV game show. After the audition, I was wandering around and came upon the Tonight Show studio. There was no one around, so I went up to the stage and sat in the host's chair. I took the Chinatown bus back home from college and sat next to this guy. We didn't talk the whole way. Then 4 months later on the bus back to school, after being home for the weekend, I sat next to him again. We talked a little. His girlfriend lived in my home city, so he would take the bus to visit her sometimes. We went our separate ways. I watched an ant pick up its injured friend with its 2 front legs and run away on its last 2 legs like a human would.
I was 5, and we'd just moved to a new house. My mom had sent me outside to play while she unpacked stuff. The house had recessed can lighting under the eaves on the outside. There was a bird in one of the light fixtures trying to unscrew a bulb. It was using its wings, feet, and body pressure to work the bulb around. My dog and I were on a walk on our local college campus one weekend, and he nosed the lilac bush that was apparently full of little butterflies. They all took off into the wind and then proceeded to do a perfect little spiral around me. I was so dumbfounded by them all that I was spinning in circles trying to see them all, which probably contributed to them doing a spiral. I was making air currents with my dress, but then it culminated with them landing on my head like a crown, presumably because of the sweat. Butterflies are weird like that. My dog, by this time, is sitting nearby waiting for me to get over it and keep walking, looking majestic as heck with his own little smattering of butterflies hovering around his face.
14 years ago, I just started dating my now wife. She was a massive Harry Potter fan, and we had gone on a holiday to New York. As we had no money, taking the Staten Island ferry seemed like a good idea, so we went across. Upon landing, we realized there was not much to do, so we ended up doodling on each other with an eyeliner. Daniel Radcliffe was in a play called Eclipse at the time, in which he appears naked. So I drew a picture of a naked wizard on my girlfriend. We laughed and thought nothing of it.
Lying in bed watching a movie and too lazy to move, I saw a small, harmless spider drop down from a thread on the ceiling. Even if it wasn't venomous, I didn't want to share my bed with it, but I also didn't want to move. Not thinking it'd actually do anything, I reached out my arm towards it and started waving my fingers at it in annoyance. To my absolute surprise, it immediately stopped its descent and actually retracted back up its line while I was sitting there in surprise. I was at a friend's off-grid cottage with our combined number of 16 dogs. We were out for a romp in the woods to take out a problem beaver dam. We finally get through enough that water started pouring through and my friend realizes her key fob is missing. Cue massive panic. The other key fob is over a 3-hour drive away. One of her dogs that was up on the dam with us stuck his head into the moving water and pulled out the key fob.
When I was 8 and my sister was 7, we both had the same dream and ended up sleepwalking together in the night out into the middle of the road. Earlier that day we had new neighbors move into the house behind us. They had 2 daughters around our age that we quickly made friends with. Well, that night my sister and I both dreamt we were running in a field full of sunflowers, picking them for our new friends. I felt so happy and carefree in the dream, and I could see my little sister running alongside me, also picking sunflowers. I held a stick straight up in the air while pretending to be a magical creature, and then it immediately started raining heavily.
I got hit by a bird while on a roller coaster once. It hurt. I hope the bird was okay. I was once arrested for dueling. That was the charge. I saw he eat a piece of cheese. It was horrifying. I didn't know it was possible.
I noticed my dog standing at the glass door with something in his mouth. It was a $5 bill. We went to Burger King and grabbed him a cheeseburger for a reward. The next day, he was at the door with one, so we got him another burger. I figured it was only fair, as he paid for it.
A guy I was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife and my daughter said no, don't go daddy. Of course I can't resist that, so I stayed home and we had a good night. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing, but something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around. Colonel's grandfather, in the days before hot water on tap, put a big pot on to boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe with. The pot boiled over and extinguished the flame, and he returned to find them dead of carbon monoxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. Murder of the Green family. A deranged pedo named Joseph Edward Duncan was already on the run from the cops for a past sexual assault. He was incredibly charming and manipulative, and was truly pure evil. He camped outside a family's rural home, unseen by them. He picked it out after driving past it and seeing children's toys outside. He watched them from afar, got to know their routine with the intent of kidnapping the children. 10-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Chester.
The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom cabinet mirror. In a sinking ship found an oxygen bubble and only drank a sip of Diet Coke every 7 hours. He was rescued after 60 hours after being under constant danger from drowning and even sharks. 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his pregnant wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans' trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. Had the police handled the forensic evidence properly, Christie would have been caught when they were investigating Evans, and those 4 people would still be alive.